So in my eyes, the biggest differences in this fight are going to be the age and reach advantages. So one of them goes to Israel, and that's going to be the reach advantage, with him having 5 inches more reach than Imavov does with 80, and Imavov's only got 75. But the age advantage is, I believe, 6 years, could be 7 years for Imavov. He's only 28 years old, whereas Izzy is 35, turning 36 soon. So that's going to be the biggest things I want to talk about in terms of their tailor the tape, I guess, as you'd call it. Everything else is relatively similar. They're about the same height. They have somewhat similar records, about 24-4. Oh no, 15-4. But in the UFC, 7-2 for Imavov, and Izzy is 13-4. So actually very similar in terms of their win percentage in the UFC. But there is some things I want to point out about their fight styles, their previous opponents, and yada yada yada, so we're going to jump straight into that. First thing I'll mention is their recent careers. So, Izzy has had a rough recent couple of years. Now, a lot of people would argue, and I would maybe be one of those people, but I also have not been a fan of the sport long enough to have been really around during these times, as much as I just know about it now, in the post of these events. Izzy, in hindsight, didn't look great in a lot of his title defenses, okay? Now, he's got a lot of losses recently, and that's just an obvious thing to point out. Like, he lost a lot of fights. He got finished in a couple of fights too. But I think the bigger thing to point out here is that while he looked a bit better recently, and there's been certainly an improvement in Izzy's, I don't know, maybe just grit and wanting to chase the fight in his last fight with Dricus. Prior to that, and I guess in the Pereira fight too, prior to that, there's a lot of fights there that people would have maybe previously called somewhat of domination from Izzy that probably aren't really that good. So the things that I would point that out as is obviously the Romero fight is an obvious one that everybody understands, but then he went back to back with that and the Costa fight, which probably won a lot of fans back. However, he did grow a boob in his camp with that fight, but that's neither here nor there. He then goes up and loses to Blachowicz, which was a bit of an unfortunate bump in the road, but that one is very, very understandable and kind of granted for him because he went up a weight class, wasn't big enough. He'd come in at like 190 pounds or something. He didn't actually 194 or something. He didn't even make the weight limit because he doesn't even cut that much weight to make 185, or previously at this time he didn't. So that one's kind of okay. The Vettori fight, a lot of people would say was a bit of a domination, and I would probably agree. Not one of the most insane fights, but not one of the worst, that's for sure. However, the Robert Whittaker fight, the rematch, people would say that he lost that fight. And that is also, as I said earlier, neither here nor there, just wanting to point these things out and give you some things to consider when making your predictions or coming to your final conclusion on things based on the predictions of people like myself that you're watching YouTube videos of. And then he followed that up with the Cannonier fight, which was incredibly boring. Okay? And then he comes off at the Cannonier fight and loses to Pereira. Now, he was beating Pereira in that fight, and he was literally like 3 minutes away from beating Pereira by a decision. But then he gets finished by Pereira. Whether you think it's a controversial finishing sequence or not, I disagree. That's something that I'm pretty stern on. Izzy was getting pretty fucked up by Pereira. He tripped over in the midst of that finishing sequence and ate like 6 or 7 unanswered shots in that final flurry where he gets hit a couple times and the ref steps in between them. So that to me is very granted. So that's the kind of weird period of Izzy's career where people would be like, what the fuck's going on? Then he kind of comes back and just decides to KO Pereira. Now, people might say this is because of the weight cut. People might say that this was because of, the weight cut, but because Pereira simply wasn't the right size for the division, and he just was never healthy in that division in the first place, which is possibly true. But I would also argue that Pereira made the same type of weight cut for the first fight, and that was literally like 6 months earlier. So what real difference was there? Now, he gets that knockout, and this is the real moment where Izzy's career kind of is, he has the opportunity to really turn it around. Then he goes on to have one of the most shameful performances in his career against Sean Strickland. That one is just, to me, that was where I saw Israel Adesanya die. That's where I saw his talent just disintegrate into thin air, and just become absolutely non-existent. A lot of people might think that's because Strickland is just ridiculously good at what he does, and that is style that is, styles make fights, and that is perfect for Izzy. It's the perfect way to combat Izzy's fight style. But at the end of the day, he looked really bad in the fight, and at no point in that fight did he decide to grit down and search for a knockout in the 4th or 5th round because he knew he needed it. He just let the fight slip away and didn't really have anything to say about it. And then he decided to come back against Dricus, coming off a title fight loss, coming off 2 title fight losses in his last 3 fights. So, again, whether that's a fight style thing or not, that's just a moral thing that I have an issue with, that I think that Izzy really should have. I can't really blame him. I don't see why he would ever be like, you know what, no, I'm not going to take this title fight opportunity, I'm going to go fight a contender. Of course he was going to take it, but it's kind of just disgusting that he was in a position that was being offered to him, that he was capable of that, the UFC were willing to give him that leg up, and then he lost and he got choked out. So he looked better in that Dricus fight. That's what I want to talk about. This was a very much rejuvenation of Izzy, and I'd argue this is even more of a rejuvenation than it was in the Pereira rematch, because the Pereira rematch, he kind of just forced himself into a position where he could get a lucky KO. Right? Well, I'd say lucky, but it's lucky because of how precise he had to be with it. Like, he could have very easily set that KO up and then missed and then been stuck up against the cage with Pereira teeing off on him, but he was willing to play possum and get Pereira really excited and overzealous with his engagements and then catch him. In the Dricus fight, though, it was a bit more of he genuinely just looked better, and he genuinely just was performing better throughout those rounds. Now, he still did lose a round to Dricus, I believe. I think it was 2-1 to Adesanya going into that 4th round, and then he got choked out by Dricus in the 4th round. So, to me, Izzy's career has had somewhat of a revival recently, but I don't think he's going to get any better, and he is getting quite old. And I feel like he doesn't have the same steam in the engine that the Dricus fight was pretty much the final opportunity for him to have something to fuel him. This is just fighting Imavov now, just a contender fight. It's not for a title. It's the first time he hasn't been in a title fight since 2019 when he fought Anderson Silva. So this is going to be a very different situation for Adesanya. There's going to be very different motivations behind it, and that doesn't give me much faith in him. Now, if we want to look at Imavov's recent career, it's also had its moments of weirdness, I will admit. So, first of all, when he got into the UFC, he lost the decision to Phil Hawes, which is fucking abysmal, and that is one of the worst things you could ever have on your record, is a loss to Phil Hawes. So, shame on you, Imavov. You got to deal with that for the rest of your career. But after that, he goes on to go finish, and then beats Buckley in a decision, and then he gets the Sean Strickland fight. Now, this is interesting, and I will come back to this in a moment. We're going to move on past it, and I will circle back to the Strickland fight because I want to talk about that and compare his Strickland performance to Adesanya's Strickland performance. Chris Curtis, however, was another weird fight. They had a clash of heads, and then the fight, ended in a no contest kind of shit. Then the Roman Dolidze fight happens, okay? And he kind of just fucking mauls Dolidze, alright? And this was all last year. He was quite active last year. He had 3 fights. Mauled Dolidze, goes on to fight Cannonier, has a bit of a weird back and forth with Cannonier. I just rewatched this fight, and I was kind of surprised with how much I misremembered it. I felt like I remembered this fight being a lot more clear for Imavov, but it wasn't. Cannonier was arguably winning the fight before the finish. Imavov was building pressure and momentum and starting to sort of keep his snappiness and power later on in the fight when Cannonier was not, but that wasn't really what mattered. What mattered was that he finished Cannonier. Arguably weird finish. Early stoppage from the referee is certainly a warranted opinion to have, but Cannonier was probably about to get fucked up, and this fight led Cannonier to be brutally fucked up in his next fight. So, you can't have your cake and eat it. You got to choose. And Cannonier, unfortunately, got fucking brutalized by Kayo in his next fight because of this stoppage being somewhat controversial and forcing the referee to be scared to step in there when Cannonier was hurt. And he was literally dead against Kayo. So then he has the Brendan Allen fight, and this one from memory was also quite weird. He did way better than Brendan Allen on the feet at pretty much all times from what I recall. But he did get taken down by Brendan Allen a fair bit. When Brendan got on top of him, he did essentially nothing. It was a lot of laying, a lot of just meh activity, but it showed that there is a level of grappling holes, I guess, in Imavov's game. Now, it's not necessarily something that's been clearly exposed, and it's not something that that I am led to believe that he has the ability to, or that he has the capabilities of being exposed in again, especially not against an Adesanya. But it's something to note. So, let's talk about the Sean Strickland performance. So, I would argue that there is big differences in these two guys' fight styles. There's a lot of similarities in these two guys' fight styles, Imavov and Adesanya, just with a couple of slight tinges, which I'm going to use as my main point of my prediction. But the Strickland performances are interesting. And I'd say this because Izzy looked kind of just worn out throughout that Strickland fight. Very just no longer caring. He's been demoralized, essentially, and he didn't have the willpower to continue the same way. I don't think that's what we saw happen in the Imavov and Strickland fight. Now, you could argue it was a different Strickland he fought at the time. There wasn't the same motivation behind it, the way that Strickland had when he was fighting Izzy. But they both did struggle in the sense of the cardio from Strickland, as everyone does, but allow me to just point it out. The cardio from Strickland, the output from Strickland, and just kind of building on you. Now, from memory, I'm going to pull up the numbers here. I feel like there was a kind of somewhat of a comeback from Imavov in that last round against Strickland. So I could be wrong, but I do want to double check this. Yes, he won the 5th round against Sean Strickland, or based on strikes, it looks as though he would have. So that's very different to the Adesanya versus Strickland fight. Now, it looks like Imavov arguably may have been close in the first 2 rounds of Strickland as well, but I believe it was a pretty clear Strickland performance. The 49-46 is across the board, except for one's 48-47. So yeah, I'm guessing that mostly it was just the 5th round being given to Imavov, and the 2nd round was quite close. So I'm guessing the 2nd round may have been given to Imavov too, because he's got more power than Strickland. So that would, if they had similar strikes, I could see Imavov being favored for that by looking more powerful and more damaging. Now, that is what I want to say about the difference in these two guys' fight styles. They're both long, rangy, and they both can succumb to pressure. That's something that's true. They both can be outworked to a degree. But I don't think that Izzy is going to be the one to pressure and try and outwork Imavov, which does lend in Imavov's favor, because he can do quite well when he gets to pressure you. Now, that being said, Izzy does very well when he gets to choose his shots. He does very well when he gets to let you kind of feel like you're controlling the dance, and then pick his moments and strike when he finds the most precise openings. That's also something that Imavov is very good at too. Really clean shots just when he sees the openings. Again, a similarity is that. And the difference in the similarity is power. I just see a much more divisive power edge toward. I see the power edge being much more divisively swayed towards Imavov having the finishing capability, which I don't see Izzy having anywhere near as much of. Izzy has very good counters. He can develop power based on that, but he is frail and skinny, and he doesn't have a lot of pop based on his body and his body composition and his just the way that he is built. Okay, it's a lot more of him being good with angles, being good with the precision, and knowing where to place his shots. And I'm saying, Imavov is good at that too, but I would give Izzy the edge on the precision and placing of shots and counters. But I would say that Imavov's power edge leads me to believe that if we're going to be in a battle where either A, Imavov gets to choose he wants the pressure, or B, they neither of them choose the pressure and they both kind of want to have a not necessarily point fight, but a pick and choose shots looking for the right openings kind of battle, I feel like Imavov is the only one that I see having the capability of getting a finish that way. Now, I could 100% see an Israel Adesanya decision win. That's something that if he's able to work Imavov down a bit and get Imavov to not have the same level of output like I'm seeing that Imavov is capable of doing against Sean Strickland in the 5th round, which is hard to do. Strickland gets very good late in the fights. He got better as he went on in the Izzy fight, and he got better at the end of the Dricus fight after he kind of had his time to work Dricus out, came back in that 5th round. But I just feel as though Imavov's ability to last the full fight may give me doubts whether he could win a decision. Now, I still think he could, but I am going to say if it goes to a decision, I would edge it towards Adesanya. I feel like, especially based on scorecards, Izzy's fight style favors judges. It gives much more capability of being not biased, but being swayed in one direction without it actually being the performance that sways you. It's just the way the performance looks that would sway you in that direction. Izzy's really good at that. He's really good at, you could always say the commentary is biased towards Izzy, but we're in fucking Riyadh right now for this card, so this is not going to be American judges. They can, there might be some, but like, you know what I mean? They're going to be different judges, so like the Las Vegas judges. So I'm not worried about it being judges that like Izzy. I'm just worried about it being Izzy's fight style does still lend itself to looking good to judges, because even shots that he doesn't land that well, that even like leg kicks that get checked and stuff like that, Izzy has a way of making them look good. He has a way of making it look like they landed, or even if they didn't land, that it's like, well, it didn't get blocked, when it kind of did. He can make a checked leg kick look like it was just a light leg kick. It didn't land to its fullest extent, but it wasn't like I got nullified, when in fact he did get nullified by having his leg kick checked. So I'm going to say that I think Imavov has the ability, like I said, to, if they're going to play the counter game with one another, and they're going to have a bit of a power off and a bit of a stand in the middle and put your dick on the table, and if Imavov, like I said, he could pressure him, and that could be the way Imavov wins, by just kind of building on Izzy, and Izzy not really having the capability of deciding to impose his own will and his own output, because it's just not what he's good at doing on the feet, unless he's fighting someone that's not conventionally a striker, like, I don't know, maybe a Dricus or something like that, you know. But I do see this being a Imavov finish, and it certainly could be a grappling, if we are to go grappling, and that's something that I also feel like Imavov would do if he's losing a decision. I could certainly see Imavov in the 4th and 5th round deciding, fuck it, I'm going to try and choke this guy out. I don't think Imavov has any submissions on his record. He has four submissions, but not in the UFC, right? There's no submissions in the UFC, no. He's got a rear naked, a Bravo choke, and a rear naked, and another submission, or key lock before he came into the UFC. So they were all pre-UFC. Since he's got the UFC, he's only gotten KOs and TKOs and decision wins, which is why I'm saying this fight could certainly be a decision. But it does lead me to want to pick Izzy for a decision. But that's not going to be my overall pick. My overall pick is going to be Nasruddin Imavov. I'm going to say that I feel like he just overworks Izzy, and maybe either pressures on Izzy and just kind of gets Izzy too hurt, covers up, maybe Izzy falls to the mat and gets ground and pounded. Not brutally, I don't see Izzy getting knocked out in that sense. However, I could see Izzy getting, if it's not knocked out, it's very rocked and being put on his butt by a really solid Imavov right hand, or a really solid Imavov head kick, which we've seen him use unconventionally. I don't know if it would be just a normal head kick. That's something I'd say Izzy's probably much better at than Imavov. But like, think of the Delidzi fight, where Imavov is just able to whip up a head kick in a weird place. If they get into those kind of weird scrambles where Izzy's a bit like, even if he's not that hurt, but he's in a shelling kind of ultra defense mode where he's doing almost anything and putting himself in precarious positions to try and back out of this bad opportunity that is presenting to Imavov, he could get caught with something unconventional like that. But my prediction is going to be a solid right hand, either rocks Izzy and pushes him to the mat, leading him to get TKO'd by ground and pound, or it could be a really big right hand that hurts Izzy, and then Imavov follows up with just general strikes to the head. He's got good just overall upstairs strikes, but I feel like that right hand is going to be really good at Imavov. I'm going to say when it would happen. If it gets to the end of the fight, like I said, I don't see it being that possible for Imavov. I would guess the 3rd round is probably pretty likely. So we're going to go ahead and say KO/TKO from Imavov in the 3rd round. Guys, thank you for being here. Please join me for the live stream. I'd love to have you there. Leave a like, subscribe, chuck on notifications, and I'll see you guys all in the next mixed martial arts video. Goodbye.